Welcome everyone to the College of Liberal Arts here at Oregon State University and to the School of Writing, Literature, and Film. My name is Liddy Datar and I'm so thrilled to be here with you this afternoon and to be joined by local author Julie Mathison. I took a quick look at the attendees coming in. I see we have attendees joining us from across the United States. Welcome. Good for you for staying up so late. And we also have a couple of attendees coming as far as Italy. Good morning to all of you. This is not an ideal time zone for all, so thank you for being here. We are in for a fantastic afternoon, evening, or early morning together. Before we begin, as is our custom, I'd like to offer an acknowledgement that Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon, is located in the traditional homelands of the Marys River or Apanefu Band of the Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, the Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon, and today living descendants of these people are a part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. For those of you joining us for the first time, I'll share a few links in your chat in case you'd like to learn more about land acknowledgements, as well as the history of Oregon State University and the land on which it sits. Julie joins us today as part of Social Action Works, an initiative in the College of Liberal Arts intended to invite students and all of us really to explore how we practice what we love, a field of study, an artistic endeavor, a dream, an idea or vision we have for ourselves, and how we design a plan so that what we love is what we contribute in the professional, personal, and community spaces where we hold investment. Our hope is that Social Action Works brings us together for conversation, storytelling, and through that process, we begin to create a network of relationships among us to share our passions, our social concerns, and our personal and professional visions for ourselves. I want to thank the College of Liberal Arts, Dean's Office, and the School of Writing, Literature, and Film for support of this program and this event in particular. I also want to thank the CLA Office of Career Development for its promotion of the event. And a very special thank you to Erin Sneller, whom you don't see, but who is our CLA event coordinator. And Erin created our webinar and will keep this virtual event running smoothly for all of us. Before we get started, if you would like to access captions, they're available through Zoom using the CC closed caption button on the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, there are a couple of options for whatever you might like for that. The event is being recorded for the purposes of compiling an archive accessible to students of the Social Action Works program. And if you have any questions or would like more information about that or the program, you are welcome to reach out to me and I'll put my email contact in the chat as well. We have a Q&A function in the menu of your screen. Please feel welcome to use that function and post questions. We will gather those together and we'll share them during that part of our evening. So today, Julie joins us to talk about finding your voice and following your writing dreams. So let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce now Karen Holmberg, who will offer a welcome for Julie. Karen is Associate Professor of Creative Writing in the School of Writing, Literature, and Film, where she teaches both creative writing and English. She is a poet, a letterpress printer, and not more than one hot minute ago, Karen received the 2021 Achievin Book Prize for her first work of young adult fiction, The Collagist. Karen's book will be published by Fitzroy Books, which is part of Regal Press. So congratulations to Karen. And I know you're out there, Karen. Hi and welcome.
Hello, everybody. And warm welcome to today's talk by Julie Mathison. Julie is the founder of Starr Creek Press and the award-winning author of books for young people that seek to delight, transport, and inspire the child inside of every reader. Do you believe in fairy tales? So begins the first chapter of Vasilisa, Julie's second novel and current semi-finalist for Publisher Weekly's Book Life Prize. Having pursued her dream all the way to the editor's door, only to lose her prince, Julie's fairy tale ending has ultimately been one of her own making. She will be talking today about the crucible of craft and finding the path to publication that best suits your vision, priorities, and needs. More broadly, she will be speaking to the power of being courageously out in the world with your creativity and owning your voice. Whether you are a writer, reader, or just someone with your own dream, she hopes you will hear in her story pieces of your own. When not slaying dragons or meeting self-imposed deadlines, Julie can be found on her farm outside Corvallis, Oregon, where she lives with her husband and 2 teenage children. A former attorney and Jacqueline of all intellectual trades, she founded her author imprint Starr Creek Press in the spring of 2020, when the world came to a halt and she found herself with time on her hands. Since then, her debut novel, Believe, has won the Eric Hoffer Book Award for Best Middle Reader and the First Horizon Award for Debut Books. And her second novel, Vasilisa, is a contender for the Book Life Prize. More importantly, she's enjoyed the satisfaction of sharing her books with hundreds of readers and beginning to build a dedicated readership from the ground up. Her motto, "Books, Not Boxes," is founded on a belief in the powers of original voices to enrich and transform our literary landscape. A vital opportunity in meeting Julie is getting to ask questions about her path in writing, her publishing journey, and anything else you're curious about. So please post your questions to the Q&A. And now I turn this virtual stage over to Julie.
Hello and welcome. As you heard, I'm Julie Mathison. I write books for children, for young adults, and for adults who read books written for children and young adults, of which there are more than you would think. And I publish through my author imprint, Starr Creek Press. So before I dive in, I did want to take a minute for a few quick thank yous myself. I want to thank Liddy Detar, who happens to be a great friend of mine and who's responsible for me being here today. I feel incredibly honored to be a part of this series. Karen, who's been so gracious. I wanted to second my congratulations to Karen. I was thrilled to hear about her prize and her forthcoming publication, and the fact that that she's working with a small press really works brilliantly into my talk today. So we'll be touching on that a little bit later. I met Erin tonight. She's been doing a fantastic job. And I just really wanted to thank all the people associated with this series, the Social Action Work series, for making it happen. I also want to thank those of you who took time out of your busy days to be here today. I know we have students, we have writers, teachers, passionate readers. Some of you actually don't write and you're just bringing whatever passions you're engaged in your own life. So wherever you come to this talk from today, I just want you to know that in sharing my story, my hope and my intention is that you hear something that's relevant and useful on your own journey. So with that being said, I will dive in. As we all know, we live in a time of tremendous change. Traditional structures are being challenged. New structures are emerging almost daily. I just came across an article that the US Justice Department is in the process of suing Penguin to try to prevent it from acquiring Simon & Schuster. So there's tremendous flux in the industry. So today, as I'm talking about my writing journey, but also more broadly about these different structures, the paradigm of traditional publication, independent publication, small presses, which fall somewhere in between the two and have characteristics of both, hybrid publishing, in which an author might choose to sell certain books traditionally, others independently, or even sell off certain rights. So even though it's a chaotic time, it's my belief that there's never been a better time to be a writer, which is very exciting. And there's never been more examination, I think, collectively about what we think publication and writing should do for us. So I'm just going to dive into my story. I came to writing, as most writers do, through reading. So I was fortunate to have very loving parents But we moved a lot. We had a lot of change in our lives. There was a lot of first days at school and a new school, which is probably a familiar story. There seems to be a running theme for many writers along those lines. When I was 7, living in San Francisco with my mom, I encountered for the first time the San Francisco City Library, and a light went off. I can still remember the smell of the library, the shelves lined with books, the librarian, and this sense that I had been introduced to a whole new world where I could at will pick up a book and essentially disappear and be transported to a place where I was swept away and free. So I took home the Laura Ingalls Wilder books and I read them under the covers with my flashlight. And sometimes I would even beg my mother to let me stay home from school so I could read. And so really that defined my whole childhood. And I think it's important for us as writers to connect with and stay connected with that initial spark that has us write. It certainly led to me wanting to write for children, but really it did lead me to want to write to the child in every reader, because I don't think we ever really outgrow the need for that sense of wonder, which so many of us experienced as child readers. So fast forward, went to college, not surprisingly, got a BA in English. I actually started as a fine arts major, switched to journalism, and then I ended up with so many English credits that, of course, I thought, well, I'll just get an English degree. And well, what do you do with an English degree, right? So I went to law school. I figured I'm a good student, did well on the PSAT, I think I can do this. So I did well in law school, graduated, practiced part-time for a while, did a variety of other professions, sort of trying them on, some of them better than others. Financial advisor, not so much. I worked in Georgia with displaced workers from a Levi Strauss factory. That was amazing. But all the time in the background for me, I'm writing literary short stories, sporadically sending them off. This may sound familiar to some of you too. Gathering rejection letters and really wanting to write novels, which was, my life dream. So at 32, I got married, pregnant with my first child. And while I was pregnant, I decided to write my first novel. Sat down at the computer every day, opened it up with my cup of coffee. Back when I was in high school, I was a diver. So writing my first novel was rather like going off the diving board for the first time. You don't know what your body's doing, but eventually you get in the water. And that's pretty much how it was. I wrote the kind of book that I had loved as a child. So it was a portal book. It's called Mab's Gate. And it featured this antagonist, Ignatius Moothart Overbuilt, or I Am Overbuilt, who with his band of thugs, ridiculous, meticulous, insidious, and hideous, ruled in this kind of Dickensian alter universe called Mab's Gate through its principal city, Palmtropolis. And when I was done, this was early 2000s, so it was still the era of snail mail, I put it in an envelope with my self-addressed and stamped envelope, and I sent it off. And more often than not, in that time, you would hear back from the agent, and you might even get a scrawled note on your manuscript. And, I was at this long enough to see a lot of that change, but that's how it was then. So this brings me to my first main point, which is one of the main benefits or the strengths of the traditional publishing path, which is getting pushback on issues of craft. So I set my masterpiece off, and naturally it was not ready for publication. So I would get feedback from agents like, oh gosh, well, I really like the voice, but the plot seems episodic, or your characters aren't fully realized. And, I think I related to my work at that time from a place of wanting to rely on my strengths and avoid my weaknesses. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One is that I think when we start to write, often we see our work as an extension of ourselves. So it's not just our work that's being judged somehow, but somehow ourselves. And so there's this tendency to want to sort of protect what you've created and not turn toward your weaknesses. The second thing is that, I think I might have just been a little lazy about it. I told myself, oh, they're gonna be so captured by my voice, we'll work the rest of it out after they sign me. And of course, that doesn't happen, and it shouldn't happen. So this is a real strength of the traditional publishing paradigm, And I want to say one more word about the individuals that work in that industry, because I'll be talking today a little bit about gatekeepers and how they relate to how that system functions in the aggregate. But I want to say that as individuals, these people are extraordinary. I mean, these are really highly trained, very passionate people, often working for little pay, long hours, and they do it because they love the written word and they're passionate about what they do. So there's a really beautiful skill set to be found in that world. So I had my first real paradigm shift of my journey, which was that I turned toward my weaknesses. I spent quite a bit of time avoiding this, but at some point I really turned toward it. I had a shift or a kind of epiphany, and I began to experience some excitement around my weaknesses and kind of pulled them to me. There's a couple of things that are really valuable about this. The first was that it was my first step toward my reader. So, you know, as long as I have my work just be about me and an extension of me, I'm not really getting into the world of the reader. And there's something very liberating about freeing yourself from the tyranny of your narcissism. And when you start to step out, you know, into your weaknesses, you're starting to step into that world of how do I reach another person? How do I sweep them away? What is not working yet that could work better? And that's a much more exciting and productive sphere to be working in. So once I started to do this, I found that my quality of my work really skyrocketed. And eventually I got my agent. This, of course, was a very exciting moment. I'd been working for many years. I can still remember sitting in the coffee shop and getting the call. My agent was with the Sandra Dykstra Literary Agency, which is one of the premier West Coast agencies, and they represent authors like Amy Tan. My agent was very firmly established. She had other authors that were New York Times bestsellers and to her list. So it was a really exciting culmination of all those years of work. And I really did feel like I had finally made it. Of course, you know, as it turned out, that turned out to be the first step in a much longer journey, but had a great time working with my agent. This ushered in a really productive phase of my growth. And there were certain perhaps limitations that I'll speak to in a little bit, but on the whole, that experience of being in partnership with somebody who's committed to my work was very productive for me. We got Vasilisa into shape, and then the sublist went out. So this is the agent's submission to all the editors that she has created relationships with at the different houses. So she sent me the sublist, and it was very exciting because had all the names that I had, you know, long revered, like Harper Children's and Razorbill and Candlewick. And so it was this tremendous experience of excitement. So this brings me to the next chapter in my education, which was around marketability. So I've already spoken to the first thing that I encountered within this traditional publishing system was pushback on issues of craft and how valuable that was to me. So now I was encountering pushback on issues of marketability. We all know that, particularly in the traditional publishing sphere, books have to sell. So there is a lot of conventional wisdom that develops in these relationships. The agent needs to sell the book to the editor, essentially, or to sell the editor on the book's marketability. The editor has to sell the house on it, and the house ultimately has to feel that it can sell well in the general marketplace. And in the process of this analysis, what they're really trying to determine is who their reader is. So there's a lot of collective wisdom around who the reader is ultimately is going to buy this book. So I point that out because, you know, the feedback I got was on issues of craft, very positive. There were considerations like, I'm not sure the voice is firmly enough middle grade, or it has a little old-fashioned feel to it, or I'm not sure if we can reach quite enough readers. I got a request for a revision from Paula Wiseman Books. In the meantime, I had written another novel, Believe, which was a mashup of my own childhood, middle grade book. I had written it in about 20 days. It because it was, I think, a mashup of my life. It just sort of flowed out of me. Tao loved it. We worked on that, developed it. And so as I'm going back to revise on Vasilisa, we went through the same process with Believe and got Believe out there, much to the same effect. Lots of praise, interest, requests for a revision from Harper Children's, but no sales on the first round. So while this is going on, I have another project that I send to Tao, which is it's called The Starlit Letter. It was to be the first book in a young adult mystery series. And this book, she didn't know what to do with. She loved it, but she thought, is the voice middle grade? Is it young adult? Is it even adult? And I think in this moment, she sort of had an epiphany about me, and that, you know, this first two books hadn't performed as well as she had thought that they would. And so she had to make, and this new book, well, she didn't know what to do with it. So I got the letter that every writer, you know, that has an agent does not want to get, the Dear John email, and had the reaction that I'm sure we can all imagine having, and just tears and gnashing of teeth and pulling of hair. And, you know, I was devastated. I had spent so many years trying to get my shot, and I had gotten so close. And of course, that dream had collapsed. So there's a couple of things I want to say about this that are important. One is this moment of, you know, I spoke earlier to turning towards your weaknesses. There's also something to be said for turning toward your failures, right? These are things that we inherently want to avoid. So I really allowed myself to experience the collapse of that dream. And that was one part of it. I just really went through that without trying to make it go away or get back out there or fix it. I really let that be there. And in the aftermath, I had to really examine what it was that had collapsed. And what I saw for myself was that, at least in part, I had been courting traditional publication out of a desire to vindicate my work, but more fundamentally to vindicate my worth, that there was something in me that craved that credibility. And that there was something very liberating about letting that go. When you interact with the traditional publishing sphere, you're keenly aware that the ultimate power doesn't actually reside with you. And again, that's a structural reality, because obviously there's way too many books out there to get through these portals and onto the shelves. There has to be necessarily structured into that system gatekeepers. So it's not a bad thing, but it is a structural reality. And so as a writer navigating that system, you do become keenly aware that the power's not in your hands. And so then you're shaped by that. You know, there's this whole experience of, you know, waiting and wanting and wishing and hoping, and ultimately sometimes being disappointed. So I took the opportunity to really embrace all that. And in that moment, I had to ask myself a question, which was, do I believe in my voice? And what I saw for myself is that authentically I did. And I felt that I had grown in my craft sufficiently to say what I wanted to say. There were certain values represented by my work that either I couldn't or wouldn't shed in order to get through that portal. And so for me, it was a moment of tremendous audacity, because in turning toward the independent publishing land, which is where I was headed, I was really going out with no other stamp of approval on me but my own. So early days of the pandemic, you know, figured out how to do this, which was really quite a journey. I could spend a whole hour talking really just about the nuts and bolts of that. And that would be a worthwhile conversation. I subbed a couple of things out, the cover design, the copy editing. I hired professionals for that. The rest of it I learned to do myself. I formatted the interiors of the books, learned all about getting them set up to be distributed both in print and digital form. My website, created a website, social platform, getting the books up on pre-publication review sites that are utilized by the traditional entities, but are also open to self-published authors. And in August of 2020, I published Believe. In February, I published Vasilisa. And this marked the beginning of my third big shift, which was the shift that came about from actually being out in the world, rather than referenced to agents or editors or trying to get, through a portal so that I could be in the world. I was out there and my work was out there. So there are a few things about this that are worth noting. One is that the primary relationship for an author is really with their reader. And there are things that can obscure this, particularly when you're trying to be published and you're trying to convince people to validate your work. You can forget that the primary relationship really is between you and a reader. What happens in that moment when somebody that you've never met picks up your book and decides to dedicate a period of time to going where you take them, which is a tremendous honor when you really think about it, and almost like a wonder. There's almost, well, for me, this sort of sacred quality about it. And what I saw for myself is that it really only takes one reader. It only takes one of those experiences to really validate the whole process. I think when I was operating in this other world, I was really seeking fame. I was seeking fortune in very abstract terms, and I was seeking them as some kind of a compensation for some sort of perceived lack. And what I had now was this experience of actually touching the life of a reader. Now, some of the feedback that you'll get in reviews will be great. Some people will love your work. Some people will hate your work. Some people will be like, meh, it's okay. And so this is the other part about being out in the world that was really worthy of note, was that, in as much as I had to distinguish between, when I was working on issues of craft, feedback that related to craft development and feedback that maybe related more to artistic judgment. Now I was having to distinguish between, well, what is it in the feedback that is something that belongs to me, maybe something I can improve, something that's relevant to my work, and what is really just the idiosyncratic experience of the reader. Because clearly, if you get, such a wide array of feedback, it's not just about your work. So we talk a lot, as writers, about developing a thick skin when you're out in the world, which is an okay metaphor. But I think it's really more a matter of opening up to the reader and to the world. And to the degree you're able to distinguish sort of what belongs to the reader and really what belongs to you, then you don't have to close yourself down from that, and you can really benefit from all of it. So with Believe, which I will take this opportunity to show you my exhibit A, this is the hardcover. So I also, of course, created a paperback version and a digital version. So as a demonstration, I will just share one review that I got from Believe. This was from a woman that lives in the UK, and it just showed up. I can't remember if it was on Goodreads or NetGalley or where. All right, here it is. Believe is that kind of book that leaves you with the couch full of used napkins and a heart that is broken and is healing at the same time. And then she goes into a little plot recap, which I won't repeat. I have to admit that this is not the book that I was looking for, but the book I needed. The general plot has already been seen, and there's no plot twist. I understood from the beginning what was going on and how it was going to end. But there's a big but here. I loved the tenderness of the author in explaining Mel's thoughts, her fears, and most of all, I loved how her character developed. I can't even start to explain how the 30-year-old me at 2 a.m. was crying alone in bed because she didn't want this book to end. I definitely recommend Believe to the people that still believe in magic, not the wizard stuff, but the magic that's inside all of us. The one that when we were kids, let us dream and speak with objects just to know their story. The one that lets you wake up in the morning knowing it will be a bright day. The one that let us hope. So this was not, the most, raving. I mean, she's definitely, this is a positive review. There were a lot of things she connected with it. There were things that, she had reservations about. But the thing that was really special about this particular review was that moment of knowing that that the book has touched her, and being somehow with her at 2 a.m. in the UK across the ocean while she's having a moment of catharsis. So, that is the beauty and magic of being at risk and being out in the world, is that you actually get to make connections. And of course, that's what it's all about. So I'm almost to the point where I'm going to share something from Vasilisa. But before that, I'll just talk a little bit about the awards. So Believe won the Eric Hoffer Book Award for Best Middle Reader and First Horizon Award for debut books. The Hoffer Award is an international award that recognizes salient writing and excellence in books produced by small, independent, and academic presses. So it's an award that really, it's sort of an outsider award. It's an award that really recognizes voices that are outside the fold, but have something to say. So I was really excited, to win the award. I think I experienced it differently than I would have in the previous world that I'd been in, not just as a pat on the back, but really now as an entrepreneur, thinking how I could use this accolade and also how it would help me reach other authors and be a demonstration to other authors of what was possible on their own path. So a totally different context for getting that award and a totally different experience. In August, I learned that Vasilisa had gotten a Perfect Tense Critics Report for the Publishers Weekly Book Life Prize. This was a different sort of accolade. Publishers Weekly obviously is it's not an outsider entity. This is the main trade publication for the publishing industry. So this was great. I was named a quarterfinalist along with 32 other people in my category, my middle grade young adult category, and then recently learned that I was one of the 4 semifinalists in my category. So then it will proceed to the finals and then the actual prize. So Vasilisa, before it was published, or before I got Tao as my agent, there was another agent that was interested in Vasilisa. She represented a book called Wonder, which some of us remember was kind of a breakout hit, and it was made into a movie, and Julia Roberts starred in it. And so it's a big deal that had really made this agent's career. And so she was interested in Vasilisa. I had rewritten parts of it for her. And then we came to this point where she took a pass on it. And what she said is that it wasn't that she didn't love the voice, but she thought that it would be too sophisticated to be sold to editors, that it would not be deemed marketable because it would be too sophisticated for its audience. And she bemoaned, quote, the dumbing down, but shrugged, that's how it is. So what's interesting about this is that when I got the critics report from Publishers Weekly, it sort of spoke directly to this issue. So on the section that evaluates voice, there's 4 sections that you're graded on. This is what he or she said. Here is to be found finely crafted prose of a grace and precision not often found in young adult novels. The vocabulary and syntax are perfectly suited to middle school and junior high readers. So a very different assessment than I had gotten when I was trying to get kind of through the, quote, gatekeeper's door. There was something else I wanted to say. Yeah, so why I love that is that this whole thing about vocabulary and syntax is very central to what I'm committed to. So I grew up reading those classic works of literature, Heidi and The Hobbit and The Secret Garden and Little Women. They had a very high level of both vocabulary and grammatical structure and complexity. And what I found as a young person growing up is that although I didn't understand everything, it washed over me. It didn't interrupt my experience at all. In fact, I think it enhanced it. And it ended up helping me develop into a much more nuanced thinker. And I think it really aided my development. So to have that validated in this critics report was great, that there was a place for a book that had those values. And that is the benefit of having these different paths for publication so that different values can get represented in the world. I think before I read, I'll just sum up this thing about these different paths to publication and the strengths and weaknesses, because I think they operate optimally to complement and enhance each other. So traditional publishing with its emphasis on craft is very important. The fact that independently published books have to compete with that standard raises the quality. That's a tremendous contribution. I think that what can happen inside the traditional publishing sphere is that because there's it's so insular in a way. There's so much evaluation around who the reader is and around marketability that there is the danger of hegemony. You can, experience even in a diversity moment like we're in, which is magnificent. There can begin to be a certain feel or sound or a way that that's supposed to be expressed. So that whatever moment you happen to be in terms of what's deemed marketable, there starts to be this sort of trend that things feel or sound a little bit the same. Now, again, caveat being, obviously there's brilliant, nuanced standout books that don't fit this general picture that I'm painting. But there can be a tendency to find books that feel like they sort of go through their paces and they know what they want to be, because really they've been shaped, quote, to fit on the shelf. So independent publishing is really great for forcing traditional publishers to, well, first of all, for giving us another way to get original voices out into the world, but also acting as a check on the traditional publishing world's tendency, perhaps to see anything that's produced outside of its sphere as not being, on a par. And that is the challenge of independent publishers, is to demonstrate their own credibility in the absence of these traditional sort of rainmakers. Small presses are great. In fact, when I learned about Karen's experience, I got on and looked at a little bit at the press that's going to be publishing her book and their story. And it's very consistent with what I've encountered a lot, which is sometimes somebody wants to get books that represent certain values out in the world, and they can't do that in the traditional sphere, so they start their own press. And if you're wanting to be published in that sphere, you can maybe find somebody whose values really represent your own, and then you can benefit from both sides of the equation. I think what it all boils down to at the end, with there being so many choices, is that there's never been a better time, and it's never been more important to self-reflect about what is my work about, what is the reach that I want to have, who do I want to touch, what do I think is the best path for me, how much support do I need, really what do I value, and those can be the considerations that shape your path. So Vasilisa, this is Vasilisa here, and I'm going to read a chapter. This is a chapter, when I was represented by Tao, she said, well, I'm sorry, you can't have a chapter in a middle grade book that's written from an adult's point of view. Now, I mean, naturally, you and I have both read books that have, have chapters written from adults' point of view that are children's books, but this is, again, a demonstration of that collective wisdom being filtered in a very well-meaning way through an individual gatekeeper. So I changed the chapter and I rewrote it from Vasilisa's point of view. When I went to publish it myself, of course, I was able to put it back in the form that I thought was better. So this chapter, Vasilisa and Ivan are in the world of Old Rus, which is this land of witches, Baba Yaga, the witch, and Old Koshi, the ogre. They have wandered into the land of mists at the border of the thrice 10th kingdom in the Great Russian Wood. When she was back in Pennsylvania, Vasilisa had believed her father to be missing in action in Flanders, World War I in the trenches. But unbeknownst to her, he has been trapped in this borderland between life and death. And so they've emerged from the mists and stumbled upon an izbushka, just a small hut, and knocked on the door. Peter Andreevich Nikolaev stepped back from the daughter he did not recognize, over the threshold of a house he could not recall building, and sought words slow in coming. Such was his world, and had been for so long as he could not remember, for each day was both new and old, and the moments raveled away almost before he had strung them. She was such a pretty thing, this girl who called him Papa, so vivid in her joy and possessed of something rare that one might call quality. She was special, anyone could see that, a creature of contrasts, fragile and unbreakable, full of passions she could not help restraining. The boy was her bodyguard. He would follow her even into death. This Peter knew, though he could not remember his own name. You're mistaken, child, he murmured now from where he had retreated to the shadows. I call myself Niet. This was the Russian word for no, and thus had he named himself for a kind of joke, both a long and short time ago, when he had arrived in the place where he had always been. It signified the life he led and did not lead, and it was a kind of pun too, a play on no, the one act he was denied. No, no, that was his name and his fate. And if he sensed he had once had a head for words, and that even now the depth and tenor of his thoughts bespoke a life of learning, it gave him little pleasure. But please come in out of the cold, he said, still looking at the girl. She stirred in him something new, which was impossible. And so he clung to this impossible newness like a rope that had been flung into the sea. I have little to offer, but all I have is yours. The girl had not taken her eyes from him either. And as she entered now into the light of the izbushka, he could see that he had caused her pain. Papa, oh, Papa, don't you remember me? Her hair fell about her shoulders in great long curls that had been crystallized by the wintry fog to render her a fairy creature with eyes like dark pools. She wrung her hands, and the boy beside her looked on him, Niet, with deep distrust, for he would kill anything that hurt the girl. But he, Niet, was a new thing, one that would hurt the girl by his presence and his absence. So what could the boy do? It struck Niet suddenly that he knew this, and this too was new, and he felt a surge of delight in this pun that had surfaced from the far away before. He resolved to try. Please sit. I will bring you some dried meat and fruit. The young one sat on the crude chairs by the table he had fashioned on a different day he did not remember, and Niet brought them the meat and fruit and some water he had collected from a pan outside the door. And when they were all settled at the table, he set about to ask them more. He would not yet resolve himself to really know. Too often had he been disappointed, and the very idea burned him with cold yearning. You say I am your father, yet how can this be? He began. The girl smeared a hand across her eyes and composed herself with a strength of will he could not help but admire. The boy was sitting close, his arm around the back of her chair, though Niet could see he was not aware of this posture, all his mind being bent upon the threat before him. Again, it struck Niet that he knew this, and a gap opened in his mind, like the saving breath of a drowning man. Please, try to remember, Papa, the girl was saying. You were fighting in the war in France, and they said you were missing and presumed dead, but I always knew, Papa, I always knew you were still alive. Was he alive? He was not sure that this was true. But even as the girl spoke, his lungs seized up against the roil of fumes, and he placed his hands over his ears to blot the chattering of guns, laughing as they killed. And for a moment, he saw the body he had left for dead, lying mangled not far from his brother's, but that he could not bring himself to leave forever. He was not sure he wanted to remember. I know only what you see around you, he said, his voice strange, only the mist and the cold and the waiting. You've stayed too long, Papa, the girl pleaded. My matryoshka warned us that if we stayed too long, we too might forget. But it's not too late to remember, Papa, to remember Babka and Mama too. Don't you remember Tatiana, Papa? Tatiana. The word was like a hole in his heart that he forever circled, fearing to fall in. You met her in a village not far from St. Petersburg, Papa, when you were working for the revolution. And you told me once that although 10 men sought her hand, you knew the moment you set eyes on her that she would be yours. And then both of you fled, Papa, and Babka too. You all fled to America when you saw that the revolution was poisoned and that many would die. Oh, you saw it all, Papa. Don't you remember? And he began to, dimly, though what he saw caused him both joy and pain. I don't know how, he said brokenly, how to remember. Come with us, the girl begged. We'll take you home somehow. We'll get you home, and then you will know everything. But the boy shook his head. I don't think he can go home that way, Vasilisa. He must go back the way he came. Vasilisa. A new hole opened in his heart beside the other one. The girl who was Vasilisa did not want to heed the boy's words, though yet knew them to be true. Yes, this too he knew, and it seemed his knowing grew before his eyes. But the way back for him was through smoke and fire, blood and death, and he was not sure he could manage it. He was not sure he wanted to. No, he knew that he did not. And yet he now wanted other things, and all was unquiet within him. No, Vasilisa cried, reaching over the table to grasp Niet's hand. No, I'm sure we can help him. I won't say goodbye again. She was angry at the boy for telling her the truth, and Niet could see this pained him almost beyond bearing, but he would not lie to her. His love was too great. No, no, child, Niet soothed, placing his other hand over the girl's as it rested in his palm. The boy is right. My way lies apart from yours, though perhaps it leads to the same place. He was considering, not sure, yet the soft weight of Vasilisa's hand in his was helping him. It was solid and warm, where the mists were cold and ever-changing. Would he try? Could he bear to know again, if knowing meant all, and not just some? My Tatiana, he murmured, hearing the words only as he said them. And here he heard other things too, through the gunfire and the screams. Just beyond, he could hear the rumble of a great dragon that sat upon an iron egg. No, not iron, but steel, which was not of this world, but the other. And in this other place, he helped the dwarves and minions who scrabbled about the dragon for their pay, helped them stay alive and squirrel away pieces of the treasure. And each life he saved was to him like that of a comrade he had lost on Russian soil, where the dragon had eaten its own and all the treasure too, and had started on its own flesh. I want this life again. I do, but could he do it? He looked up then, full into Vasilisa's eyes, saw them widen, even as recognition widened within him, telescoping out until he could see her quite clearly, if only for an instant, and knew her to be his own flesh and blood. Vasilisa, he breathed, quite startled. And then the moment was gone, and he knew that he must follow it. Already it had fled back through the mists to the killing fields, where it must even now be running, crouched through the trenches, clinging to life. He must follow it back. There was no other way. I will go, he said, and could not see that Vasilisa's eyes shone with tears, so thick were his own. I will try, and if I succeed, we will meet again, my daughter. The girl pressed a medallion into his hand. He peered at it and found it more familiar than not, which he took to be a good sign. He had worn this, yes, in the place that he was going, and he would wear it again. Then they embraced, though already he did not know her. As he saw them to the door, he slid the keepsake into his pocket, thinking about the knowing which had fled and how he must move quickly if he were to catch it. And so with parting words, he closed the door behind them and turning, closed his eyes as well, and searching, he began. Too much talking, losing my voice. So I'm going to conclude this part. Before I leave this part, I did want to have Liddy put a couple of links into the chat, which I told her about earlier. One is my website, juliemathison.com. I love having these kind of conversations, so I'm always reachable, and you can contact me through my website. My books can be purchased through my website. If you're curious about the type of website that an independent author can create, you could certainly go on and check it out. It's available through both of them through a variety of vendors. And if you want to support independent bookstores, if you want to support grassroots books, although my books aren't yet on the shelves there, any bookstore can order my book. You can go in and say, I'd like you to order this, and then you can come and pick it up. I think that was the only link, right? Oh, and then I'm going to have her put up a second link. Yes. So if you would like to be added to my mailing list, this is a direct link to do so. And last thing, this is my book that will be coming out in February of 2022. As you can see, this is not what the cover will look like. This is the beta cover. It's just something that I'm giving to my beta readers, but this is the sequel to Vasilisa. So that's it for me for now. I don't know, do we have any questions in the queue yet? Or there's other things I can talk about it if we're still waiting for questions to come in.
I don't see any questions yet, but I'm
So
eager to get some.
Some of the different things that I could speak to, obviously, is I could speak to some of the more the nitty gritties about what it's like to be a self-published author and what that path looks like and what you can do. I would love to hear from anybody that wants to share just a little bit about, I mean, I know that we're taking questions in the chat. I can't turn the camera on you and hear, but if you want to say a little bit about something that you're up to or you're engaged in, you could share that as well.
I know we have some aspiring writers, creative writers out there in the audience, and just invite you to pose a question and let Julie play with it. Oh, we have a couple of questions. Oh, it's so exciting. Oh my gosh, look at this. Let's see. Karen, you want to start? And we'll...
Sure, I'll start. The first question we have from Posey is, what were the challenges of self-publishing? What did you not expect to be hard, but turned out to be in this process?
Oh, that is such a great question. Thank you, Posey. So the main challenge of self-publishing is visibility. I think that I expected it to be challenging. So it's not quite an answer to your question. The great thing about approaching the challenges of self-publishing is that there's always something that you can do. So in contrast to when you're trying to be traditionally published, and really all you can do is maybe send out query letters to more agents or more editors trying to get through that door, I can always do something to increase my visibility. One of the other challenges of self-publishing is producing quality work. So I have a team of beta readers that I use in lieu of having editorial input from industry professionals. So again, these are challenges that I perhaps knew would be there, but as I'm navigating the path, you know, I'm sort of discovering new things about that visibility, quality. Those are the first two that come to mind. And actually, I'll say one last thing about that. So the beauty of self-publishing is that it's a long game. It's really about developing relationships. So the main way that you reach your readers is through developing your mailing list. And so over time, you can gather around you kind of a community of people that love your work and that are excited for that next release. And in the traditional publishing sphere, it's all about, you know, the release. It's about how big and effective can we make the release? Not that the release doesn't matter with independent publishing, but it's a different dynamic. You want to be as effective out of the gate as you can. And then predictably what happens is that a book's popularity and sales taper off, sometimes pretty quickly or sometimes over time. So those are three things that come to mind. What else have we got?
So this one is from Kevin. Did you feel content with your writing prior to publishing? And I'm going to add another texted question I got, which was if you could talk about, because I think it's related, that moment where you said, do I believe in my voice? So I think those two are kind of connected. Maybe.
Yeah, very good. Yes, very good. Was I content with my writing? So the short answer is yes. It depends on which sort of juncture I'm looking at. I think one of the things that we as writers can struggle with is self-criticism. You know, we can second guess our work. So over the course of my writing journey, I think I progressively saw a shift in that. It's this kind of interesting dynamic where on the one hand, we might be tempted to protect our work from criticism from without, but at the same time, we might be highly critical ourselves about our own work. And that acts as another barrier to opening yourself up to real growth. So I think as I started to genuinely open up to feedback on my weaknesses from without, when I started to be less afraid of my weaknesses, really just to call a spade and to know, gosh, I'm not really good at that part of it. For me, plotting, character-driven action. Like this was all stuff I didn't really know how to do. And as writers, we know that learning is a lot more, it's performance based. It's a lot more like riding a bike than it is like reading a manual. You can read books on craft as much as you want, but then you have to get into the arena of writing, and it all arises, on the court, so to speak. So the kind of growth that you have is more in this vein of nonlinear learning. You might have, a moment where something is really, for me, struggling with characters, that are just real and alive and jump off the page, or a plot that's character driven, so you have events that are a result of choices that characters make, which is very exciting. And then, when you start to then learn and get to know and fall in love with your characters, and they're making these choices, and then the plot is unfolding out of that. These are kind of epiphanies that can happen if you get your hands dirty and you're not attached to what you've done before, and you've made space for the fact that you're not yet good at it. And that's the only place where that growth can discover. So the second question about believing in your voice, I think voice is itself something that is constantly changing and growing. So it's sort of an interesting question. What does that mean to believe in your voice? Does it mean that I think that the work I'm doing now is unimpeachable? Of course it doesn't. It's not even a static thing. It's going to continue to change and grow. I think answering that question is more about who you are in relationship to your voice, and who you are in relationship, I suppose, essentially to authority, and where that authority resides. And when you give yourself permission to change and grow as an author, you're also giving yourself permission to own all of it, the failures and the weaknesses and the great stuff, and it can all be good. So that's what comes to mind.
Thanks.
Should I ask the next question? We have a more of a kind of an appreciative comment, but maybe you could expand on it from Yolanka. Hi, Julie. I really like the way you distinguished between the reactions that you received when your books were read by an agent versus directly by your readers. You talked about how the idiosyncrasies of the reader play into those reactions. It also seems that there is a crowdsourced quality to relying on reader input. Readers read for many reasons, but they aren't reading to evaluate for future sales. There is a purity to the reader's reactions, especially when you look at them in the collective. Yolanka.
Yes, I think that is so well articulated. And I think it touches on a couple of things. One is just how much the world is changing. So obviously peer dynamics are emerging as a much more powerful force in the world than they once were. And this is part of sort of traditional authority structures being challenged and shifting this moment that we're in. So this quality of bypassing certain channels and going direct is definitely one of the trends of the time that we're living in, and it has a lot of benefits. I mean, I think it has both benefits and drawbacks. I mean, the benefits clearly are, that a reader, there's a couple things, like there could be your peers, like other writers, which are kind of on a lateral with you, or it could be the reader who's consuming your work really just out of a desire to enjoy your work, but both can give you great feedback. So I think the danger is, of course, that when you have an editor or an agent, they've also assumed accountability for your work, and so it's not just you that's accountable for the quality of it. They're standing side by side with you, accountable as well, and that's a different relationship than you're going to get from somebody on a more peer basis. So there's different information I think you can get from these different relationships. And I guess that's why they sort of, they all operate together optimally, and some of them may be more relevant to where you're at than others.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. So here's another one. I would like to know if Julie has any recommendations for keeping one's confidence up when you've been rejected. How do you keep from questioning your talent?
That is such a great question. And I would bet that there really isn't anybody listening that hasn't touched on that in some way for themselves. Because I think natural. I mean, my confidence, obviously, over the course of this long journey that I've explained, got beaten up a lot, right? And I went through different phases of it. I went through phases of trying to essentially maybe change myself. So in the context of writing, tried to make my work more like somebody else's. I think sometimes we look at the world and it seems like there's insiders and outsiders. Like we might come across a prestigious journal, fiction journal, that is praising another author's work, and you could think, wow, you know, they've made it. They're somebody, and I'm not somebody yet. In fact, I have this idea for a book I want to write someday, and it's going to be entitled Nobody, a Love Story, Reflections on the Nature of Self-Worth. Because I think it kind of gets to the heart of everything we're talking about today, which is, how do you decide that you're somebody? I mean, are you somebody when somebody else says you're somebody? When you get that award, or when you have that imprint backing you up, or, you know, it's all of that superficial to genuine confidence, which is what you're talking about. So I think confidence has a lot more to do with being generous with yourself, and stepping in to maybe pulling toward you things that you have pushed away. The more you're comfortable with all the different aspects of your work, but also just, you know, of who you are, the more confident you're going to be. You're not going to be trying to cover things up. You're not going to be trying to survive situations. So it's really a process of growth over time. I love that question. That was a great question.
How about one more from Stephanie Riley? She wants to know, was it difficult to finish your stories? I feel like that's what I struggle with the most. How can you end your character's story in a way that satisfies you as well as your readers? And I should add that, unfortunately, I will have to depart after hearing this answer due to another obligation. But how do you end the story?
Okay, another great question. I think this is a great question. This is definitely more in the realm of craft, and talking about craft is so much fun. And I could spend a whole nother hour enjoying just talking and engaging and going back and forth about craft. So I think endings, you know, are connected to everything that comes before. One of the things that I had an epiphany about at some point was this idea of a narrative arc, or the spine of the story. I used to try to write novels that were too big, and they felt diffuse, and like there was all this stuff happening in there. And what I realized at some point, so my novels are still complex and a lot of things happen, but there's this way in which they boil down to something very simple, which forms the spine of the story, or the narrative arc. So, you know, with you know, Vasilisa, you know, they're on a specific quest. That is the infrastructure. That quest has a specific conclusion. So there are things that have to do purely with structure, that you have to deal with as, I think, separate aspects of craft. And especially those of us that are in love with voice, we can sometimes mistake voice for story. I mean, you and I know that, you know, you can pick up a book that's gorgeous, you know, the words are amazing, and yet somehow it's just not pulling you in. It's a struggle to pick it up. It's not, you know, so voice is important for engaging and the reader on certain levels, but it's really story that drives the interest, and story that would sort of form the ending. And story really is about character, and it's about the choices that the characters make. And from the choices that they make, complications develop, but they have to want something. And it's wanting what the character wants that drives the story. And so if you can boil it down to those terms and get, you know, clear about what the arc is, who your characters are and what they want and where it's headed, more often not that the ending will come together on its own. So another great question. So Karen, I guess we're losing you.
Yes, goodbye, and congratulations on all this wonderful success. It's very,
Thank you.
very
Congratulations
inspiring.
to you too.
Thank you so much.
So, Julie, I'm going to suggest a question that might be a question we could close on, and Stephanie's question to you, the last one that was read, just kind of inspired it in some ways as I think about students in our program who are majoring in creative writing and sort of taking that leap of audacity that you mentioned, sort of the first part of going into that place of audacity and self-belief. And I wondered if you were to, in keeping with your novels, kind of go back to you as the young reader who first discovered the library and first discovered books and aspired to become a writer. Could you go back and tell that person something that you would like them to have as they start that journey, and that perhaps could also provide benefit to those who are out there on that same journey?
That's great. Because I've so been there myself, obviously, that it took me until I was 32 to first start to write my first novel shows how much we can be held back or frustrated by our perceived limitations, or just simply not knowing how to start or where to start. And so I guess what I would say to, wherever someone found themselves on that path, because I think that's a path that goes on. It doesn't, I think I've heard, I think mastery is more about getting related to and more interested in the things that you don't know. I think that what expands as you get better and better at doing things is it's not that, I think people still practice scales, professional musicians practice scales, their whole career. So you're always on that path, you're always working. And I think as a young writer, you have to get clear for yourself about, am I going to dive in? Am I going to stick with this? Am I willing to be bad before I'm good? Am I willing to get my hands dirty? And, I think the answer for most writers is yes, because I think most of the people that end up being writers are writers in some sense because they have to. It's a calling. It's something that comes from a very deep place inside themselves. So the sooner you can sort of free yourself up to include all of it, and the good, the bad, and the ugly, and come to terms with that calling, if that's true for you, the sooner you can get on the path of a lifelong learning curve, which can be very joyful and very fun. So that's my first cut at it.
Thanks, Julie. That was a beautiful answer, and a great place to remind everyone that if you want to continue a conversation with Julie, you can sign up to be on her mailing list. She generously responds in various places online. So that's a good way to do it. I also put some contact in the chat about Social Action Works. I hope you'll come back and join us for another program. And my email is there too. You can also reach me to continue this conversation to connect with Julie as well. So I would like to, first of all, thank you so much, Julie, for sharing your story and your journey and giving us your writing. Thank you to Karen for introductions, and Erin, you're out there. Thank you so much for holding this event together in our virtual space. And thank you to all of you who joined us tonight. Please follow Julie through the links provided and come back for another program. We wish you all a great evening. Thanks.
Hi.
I'm still here.
Are we all, can anybody hear me except for the two of you?
Yes, we should actually